In 2005, an Indian industrialist died in a helicopter crash. No succession plan, four sons who would from that day run separate competing companies, making each other richer every year. By every rule of Indian business, the family's wealth should have collapsed within a decade. Instead, it went up 8 times. And the reason isn't talent, nor is it luck. It's a single decision buried inside a document he signed before he died. A decision most Indian founders refuse to write. But before we get to who he was, look at what this family built. If you've driven on an Indian highway, the steel in the flyover above you was probably rolled in one of their mills. If you've taken a metro in Delhi or Mumbai or Bengaluru, the rails under your feet probably came out of their plants. The stainless steel in your kitchen, the pipes carrying gas and water across the country, the cement holding your building together, all of it one family. 4 brothers, 4 separate companies, combined family net worth of over $35 billion, third on the Forbes India rich list behind only Ambani and Adani, and it all comes from one man. A man who in 1930 had none of this. Just a 6th standard education in a Haryana farming village. His name was Om Prakash Jindal. It's 1930. In a small village in Hisar district, Haryana, Om Prakash Jindal was born into a farming family. From the time he was a child, he had one obsession: machines. How they worked, how they broke. How could you make them work better than the people who built them ever intended? That obsession is where everything began. Fast forward to the early 1950s, OP Jindal left Haryana and arrived in Calcutta looking for work. He's barely in his 20s, and one day, walking through the city, he saw something that lodged itself in his head and refused to leave. A steel pipe, stamped with 3 words: Made in England. For most people, that's a label. For him, it was a question. Why is India, a country with iron ore, coal and engineers, importing something this basic from 7,000 miles away? And so, in 1952, with about 40,000 rupees, half of it borrowed, he sets up a small pipe bending and socket manufacturing unit in Howrah, just outside Calcutta. And this was the moment. OP Jindal wasn't chasing an opportunity in a hot sector. He was building a capability the country itself didn't have. When he couldn't afford the machines he needed, he bought broken and discarded ones that other factories had given up on. And then he taught himself how to repair them, modify them, rebuild them until the workshop in Howrah was running on machinery that was, in real sense, his own. By the late 1950s, his pipes were good enough to sell. By the 1960s, they were good enough to compete with the imports. And by then, he stopped thinking like a workshop owner and started thinking like an industrialist. In 1964, he commissioned Jindal India Limited. In 1969, Jindal Strips Limited, a much larger factory. In 1970, the seeds of what would one day become Jindal Stainless was planted in Hisar. By the 1980s, the empire had stretched into steel, then power, then infrastructure. Plants in Haryana, Karnataka, Orissa, tens of thousands of people on payroll. He had built, from a borrowed 40,000 rupees, one of the largest industrial groups in India. But the factories weren't the whole story. There was a second move OP Jindal made, which is barely talked about. He ventured into politics. Not as a hobby. 3 times he won the Hisar Legislative Assembly seat. In 1996, he was elected to the Lok Sabha from Kurukshetra, and he became the Minister of Power for the state of Haryana. This wasn't a side hustle, this was strategy. The same strategic mind that figured out how to retrofit a broken machine in 1952 had figured out by the 1990s that an industrialist who didn't shape his own regulatory environment was at the mercy of one that someone else shaped for him. OP Jindal made sure that someone else was him. Now, we get to the part where most Indian business dynasties quietly fall apart: succession. You can name them on one hand: Birla, Bajaj, Ambani, the Singh brothers. Every generation, the same story plays out: ego clashes, lawyers, courtroom filings, value destruction. The thing that took decades to build comes apart in years. OP Jindal saw this happening around and thought clearly about his own replaceability. Most founders spend their entire lives optimizing the opposite, making sure their judgment is final and their name is the one that matters. OP Jindal chose the other direction. Sometime in the late 1990s, long before he died, he quietly restructured the entire group. He gave each son one business to run, full operational control. Prithviraj, the eldest, got the pipes business, Jindal saw, the same category his father had started with. Sajjan, the middle son, got what would eventually become JSW Group, steel, energy, infrastructure. Ratan got Jindal Stainless. Naveen, the youngest, got Jindal Steel and Power. 4 companies, 4 men, separate boards, separate strategies, separate profit and loss statements. So far, this looks like a normal family split. But here's a tiny detail Jindal added which explains why they are worth $35 billion today and not fighting over a will in court. It said that each son would also get a minority shareholding in each brother's company. Why is this so radical? Normally, when business families split, the competitive instinct kicks in. Your brother's loss is your gain. You're bidding against him for the same infrastructure contract. You want to win, you want him to lose. Family feeling will soften that a little. It won't eliminate it. Now introduce cross-holding. If Sajjan's JSW wins a giant contract, Prithviraj still benefits because he's a shareholder in JSW. If Naveen's Jindal Steel grows its whole operation, Ratan profits from the valuation uplift. If Jindal Stainless gets re-rated by the market, all 4 brothers see their portfolios move. You compete, but you also profit from the competition. That changes the math of every decision. Fewer zero-sum moves, less corporate sabotage, more industry-level thinking. You cannot fully want your brother to fail because his failure is also partly your failure. The lesson for business families? Cross-holdings aren't just a financial mechanism. They are an alignment mechanism. If you want siblings to cooperate, give them a financial reason to want each other to win. Now, naturally, if you are a founder, your instinct is to give each child clean ownership of their piece. No overlap that could become a fight later. Every lawyer in the country will tell you it's the safest move because it feels like you're tying your sons together against their will. It feels like you don't trust any one of them to stand alone. It feels like you're admitting they might one day compete in ugly ways. OP Jindal accepted all 3 of those things. And so he built the structure that even when they wanted that, this math wouldn't let them. Fast forward to March 2005, the blueprint he made became real. OP Jindal was in a helicopter over Haryana when it went down. He was 74. He had been sworn in as a Minister of Power just 3 weeks earlier. 2 lakh people showed up for his funeral. But here's what makes this a stress test and not just a tragedy. There was no gradual handover, no planned transition. The structure he built was suddenly required to operate without the man who built it. This is when most family systems fail. But theirs didn't, because Savitri Jindal walked in. She stepped into the role of group chairperson. She had no corporate background, no board experience. She had been largely outside the day-to-day operations of the business. And here's the move that matters. She didn't try to centralize control. She didn't try to become the new OP Jindal. Instead, by 2009, the group was formally reorganized. Holding structures were cleaned up. Ownership lines between the 4 brothers were made legally explicit. The cross-holdings were formalized. The 4 independent operations became on paper more clearly independent and in financial reality more clearly linked at the same time. The system held and then did something even harder. It scaled. Savitri Jindal contested the same Hisar seat her husband had held. She won and became the cabinet minister in the Haryana government. And by 2025, Forbes ranked her as India's richest woman with a net worth of around $35.5 billion, making her the 3rd richest person in India behind only Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani. A housewife with no formal business training presided over an industrial empire that grew after the founder's death. That isn't a coincidence. That's what a well-designed structure looks like under pressure. So where does each brother stand now, 20 years after the helicopter went down? Prithviraj Jindal chairs Jindal Saw, one of India's leading manufacturers of large diameter steel pipes with plants across India, the US, UAE and Europe. Sajjan Jindal built JSW Group into a roughly $24 billion conglomerate spanning steel, energy, cement, infrastructure, paints and even a stake in MG Motors' India operations. JSW Steel alone does close to $20 billion in annual revenue. Ratan Jindal controls Jindal Stainless, India's largest stainless steel producer and among the top 5 stainless steel makers in the world with around $4.75 billion in turnover in FY25. Naveen Jindal runs Jindal Steel, recently renamed from Jindal Steel and Power in July 2025, one of India's largest integrated steel producers with a market cap in the low double-digit billions. Each company playing in the multi-billion dollar range, from a base of around 4 to 5 billion at the time of OP Jindal's death. That is 8x. That is what his single decision delivered. Now, it would be dishonest to tell the story as a clear victory. The Jindal businesses operate in sectors deeply tied to government policy: steel, power, mining, coal. In 2013, the CBI booked Naveen Jindal in the coal block allocation scam that came to be known as Coalgate. Charges of criminal conspiracy were framed against him in 2016 over the Amarkonda Murga Dangal coal block in Jharkhand. Further charges followed in 2019 over the Urta North block. The cases are still working their way through the courts. This isn't unique to the Jindals. Almost every major Indian industrial group has navigated the intersection of business and politics, and most of them have collected some scars along the way. But it's worth saying out loud because the cross-holding structure does not solve this kind of risk. It protects against family fragmentation. It does not protect against regulatory cycles, political shifts, or the gravitational pull of policy-dependent sectors. The second lesson for business families: diversification of control is only half the puzzle. If all your verticals are exposed to the same regulatory environment, the family structure does not fully protect your wealth. So step back. What did OP Jindal actually do? He didn't optimize for control. He didn't try to remain indispensable. He didn't try to make his judgment the final one. He optimized for alignment. He asked a question almost no founder asks honestly: how do I make this work without me? And then he answered it not with a will read out in a lawyer's office, not with the hope that his sons would love each other enough to cooperate. He answered it with structure, with cross-holdings written into ownership filings years before anyone needed them, with a design that assumed his sons would compete and made sure they would profit from each other's success even when they did. Most families focus on who gets what. The Jindals focused on how every person's incentive stayed connected to everyone else's outcome. And that is the difference between wealth that lasts a generation and wealth that lasts a lineage. Building a business is hard. Building a structure that survives the founder, navigates succession, and grows across a generation, that is a completely different skill. OP Jindal did both, and the document he signed before he died is still 20 years later doing the work he designed it to do. That's the story worth studying. Next up on Roots, we have a 187-year-old empire, a name on every breakfast table in India, a fortune older than most Indian banks, the country's largest newsroom, and yet no interviews, no magazine covers, no faces you would recognize. Two brothers, one empire. One of the longest family feuds Indian business has ever seen fought quietly, in courtrooms, not column inches. They tell India who's powerful. Nobody tells India about them. Can you guess who it is? Let us know in the comments section. Like, share and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode of Roots. Until then, I'm Rohan Richard, signing off on Personal Finance TV.